Hello, everyone. Welcome to Data Ethics for All's Ethics First Live, food for thought for champions with ethics insight. It has been said over and over again that data is the new oil of the digital era. Just like oil, which is worth more when transformed into more constructive objects. When data is processed, analyzed, and utilized efficiently and instantly, it will have a much greater value. And yet, some people wield more power than others by aggregating this data and selling it to others. According to the California law, a data broker means a business that knowingly collects and sells to third parties the personal information of a consumer with whom the business does not have a direct relationship. In our talk today, we'll be talking about data brokers and the regulation around data privacy. And that is why our discussion here today is the most important discussion of our day and age. My name is Shilpi Agarwal. I am the founder and CEO of DataEthics4All Foundation with a mission to create awareness on the ethical use of the entire data pipeline and all its use cases, including artificial intelligence. Joe and I will be your hosts and moderators for today's talk. We are super excited to welcome not just this fantastic lineup of data and privacy experts as panelists, Jeff, Tom, and Heidi, but we would also like to welcome our California State Senator from the 13th District, Mr. Josh Becker, whom we are still waiting for him to join. We'll start with brief introductions, starting with Joe. Over to you, Joe. Welcome, everyone.
Welcome, everybody. A multi-billion-dollar industry whereby brokers, credit rating agencies, and others collect personal information with the open intent of reselling it to the highest bidder. John Oliver recently did a segment on data brokers. You might have seen it. He referred to them as the middlemen of surveillance capitalism. Is this, as some people would like to say, just about weighing the convenience of target advertising against maybe the irritation of corporate monitoring? Or, as some others might say, is this a genuine and real threat to our democracy? Is it selling, collecting inferences about our medical, our financial, our employment search data? Is that just a step too far? Following repeated scandals, there are growing calls for broader awareness, better safeguards, and improved regulations in this area. Tonight, we've invited some of the key actors, some of the thought leaders, and some of those really behind the push for change. I'd like to ask our esteemed panel of guests to introduce themselves briefly, and then we'll kick off the session. Maybe start with you, Tom.
Yes, hi everyone. I'm Tom Kemp, and I previously founded a cybersecurity company called Centrify, and grew that to 500 people and over 100 million in revenue. And then since selling that company, I've been a privacy advocate. So I worked on the Prop 24 campaign in California in 2020, which upgraded the CCPA to version 2, the CPRA. And then subsequently, I've been involved in writing legislation here in California. And I recently wrote SB1059 that State Senator Josh Becker sponsored that directly involved data brokers. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that later on.
Thank you, Tom.
Jeff?
Sorry, is that for me?
Yes.
Yeah, hi. Jeff Jockisch with Privacy Plan. I'm the CEO of my own consulting company and also an independent data privacy researcher who has done a lot of work on the data broker industry, including assembling an independent database of that industry and doing a lot of other work around it, including trying to put a taxonomy around data brokers and sort of discover who they are really.
Thank you. Heidi?
Hi, Shilpi, the senator is backstage. Do you want to bring him in? Yep, he's backstage. He's here. Yay!
Yay!
Yep, now go ahead. My name is Heidi Saas. I am a data privacy and technology attorney. I live in the Washington, D.C. area, and I hate data brokers. So I am here to tell you all about why and how long I've hated them and how I am super excited about the prospect of regulating them soon, because it's going to be a solution to a lot of societal ills that we're facing right now. So I'm really excited to be with this group of people, and I am looking forward to hearing everybody's perspective on the new legislation that just dropped last week. So I'm glad we already had this scheduled, right? Yeah, so now we have time to talk about it.
Senator Josh Becker, welcome.
Thank you. Happy to be here in the state legislature, as was mentioned. Represent 1 million people from the border of San Francisco down to Sunnyvale, so really most of Silicon Valley. As such, feel a particular sense of responsibility to lead on this issue, and grateful for friends like Tom Kemp, who I've been able to work with and on legislation, and will hopefully continue to do so. It's great that California has taken a leadership position, but we all know that we can keep improving the work that we've done, and look forward to helping on that effort.
On behalf of DataEthics4All, I really want to thank each of you for joining us for this discussion. We have a lot to delve into, so maybe I propose that we kick things off with you, Jeff, maybe to give a bit of an introduction to data brokers, lay some context around the industry and their activities. Maybe then we'll turn over to yourself, Tom, and Senator Becker again, maybe to discuss some of the recent effort at both federal and obviously California and state level as well. And then Heidi, it might be wonderful if I could ask you to jump in at that point then to maybe go a little bit deeper, a bit of a deeper dive into the legislative framework and the challenges you see. And after that, we'll open it up. Jeff, do you want to take it away?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Joe. Cut me off if I go long. I got a timer here, but hopefully that'll keep me short. As far as I can tell, the business aggregation of consumer data in the U.S. started way back in about 1886 when the R.H. Donnelly Company started collecting information for the Yellow Pages. But my introduction really to data brokers was when I ran a headline back in 2013 that read, "Data broker sells lists of rape victims, alcoholics, and erectile dysfunction sufferers." And that was sort of eye-opening for me. It really hasn't changed a whole lot because now in 2022, I just read a headline that says data brokers selling location data of people who visit abortion clinics. So you can really see that sensitive information about people has been sold by data brokers for a long time, and that's becoming a concern to people more and more, and they're starting to wake up to the fact that this information about people is being collected into massive profiles, 10,000, 30,000, 100,000 data points about individual consumers across the world, even like billions of people now. So this is not really a new problem. The FTC actually realized this was going to be a huge problem way back in 2014, and they created a report called Data Brokers, a call for transparency and accountability, and essentially said, hey, we've got a problem and we need to start regulating this industry. Unfortunately, 8 years later, nothing has really happened. And so, to maybe sort of start to define that problem, a couple of things you should know is that while lots of this information is out there, the accuracy can sort of suck. The gender that they have in this data is often wrong. I mean, it's 50-50 chance that they could get that right, but it's not even 50% accurate. They often get the age tier wrong. And even when they tag you as something like, sports fan or, cooking interested, that's often wrong as well, even though those are very broad categories. But one of the real problems is not that they collect your data. So if I give my information to one company, that's not necessarily so bad. The problem is that it proliferates. So I give my company to, a company that wants to collect my information for a survey to get a loan or to get a scholarship or something like that. And then that data ends up in the hands of 5 or 10 or 50 different other companies. So that's the real problem. But so how many data brokers are there out there? If you look at the registrations from California and Vermont who actually require data brokers to register, you'd think that there was only 500 or 600 of those organizations. And only about 25% of those overlap between those states, which actually tells you that there's a problem. But even back in 2014, the FTC estimated that there were about 4,000, right? And this was 8 years ago. So obviously there's a problem. There's a massive disconnect there. Nobody is actually tracking these brokers. So we don't actually know how many there are, and nobody knows exactly who they are, which is a problem. And part of that problem is that we don't have a good definition of what a data broker is. A lot of the generic definitions is essentially an organization that aggregates and collects public or private information about organizations, about individuals, and puts it into a profile. But the laws, right, that generally get put on the books say something like an organization that collects information that gets classified in a certain way and collects certain types of information about consumers, right, and doesn't have a direct relationship with the customer. And so there's all of these sort of legal opt-outs that companies can use to say, well, I'm not actually a data broker. So that's a problem. And I could go a lot further than this, and we could talk in more detail about these things if you want to. But the real problem is a definitional problem. We don't actually know how to describe a data broker. We don't know how to track a data broker, and therefore we can't really regulate one. I'll stop there.
Thank you, Jeff. And we'll come back to you on that with more details. But let's talk about what is being done to address this challenge at the federal and state level. Tom, can you kick us off with information on the Federal Delete Act?
Absolutely. So in February of this year, two senators on a bipartisan basis, Senator Cassidy and Senator Ossoff, as well as Representative Trahan in the House, so it's not only bipartisan, but bicameral, proposed what's known as the Delete Act. And DELETE stands for Data Elimination and Limiting Extensive Tracking and Exchange. So I'm just going to call it the Delete Act. And what the Delete Act would do would direct the FTC to create an online dashboard for Americans to submit a one-time data deletion request that would be sent to all data brokers that are actually registered. So right now, as Jeff mentioned, that there are registries in Vermont and California, but there's no national registry. There's been a couple state law attempts, Oregon, Massachusetts, and also Delaware, but they're not really progressing. I think 2 of the 3 didn't make it out. So it's very difficult to create a registry. And to Joe's point, you got to define it. But this would create one at the federal level. And from there, it would allow consumers to actually go in there and say, do not track me or do a global delete. The issue is, of course, with data brokers, we don't know who they are, right? Because we don't directly interact with them. They're basically operating in the shadows, and there could be anywhere, there could be 4,000 of them. We just don't know, right? But hopefully a bill such as this would force them to register at the federal level, and then a consumer could say, do not track me, do not collect any information about me moving forward, but also enabling to allow someone one-stop shopping to actually delete the information across all the data brokers that have registered, et cetera. Now, this is not a new idea. Actually, what made headline news is in 2019 in January, Tim Cook, the CEO of Apple at Davos, actually proposed this same thing. So 3 years before that the senators and the representative proposed this, Tim Cook said, I'm quoting, "That's why we believe the Federal Trade Commission should establish a data broker clearinghouse requiring all data brokers to register, enabling consumers to track the transactions that have bundled and sold their data from place to place, and giving users the power to delete their data on demand freely, easily, and online once and for all." So I think that spurred the idea, but that's not even original idea. because a few months before that, Senator Wyden had proposed that, and independently other people, such as myself, a few years ago, I proposed something as well. So a lot of people have been talking about this, and the basis for this, and kind of the proxy that people are thinking about is the FTC's Do Not Call registry. And that was established in 2003 that allows consumers to go to the FTC website and say, hey, I'm going to put my phone call in and I want to have telemarketers stop calling me. And the telemarketers need to register with the FTC and they need to respect this. Now, obviously, there are people that are not respecting that. We still get telemarketing calls, but this did dramatically reduce it. And the other really good thing about the Do Not Call registry, which makes it a great model for the Delete Act, is that it actually passed constitutional muster. A number of telemarketing firms, after it was passed in 2003, sued to actually get this killed, say that it violated their First Amendment rights. And there was a Supreme Court case, actually the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals, and the case was called Mainstream Marketing Services, Inc. versus Federal Trade Commission, that the 10th Circuit of Appeals upheld the registry, saying that, hey, this actually is constitutional as well. So this gives the ability to, in effect, have a global opt-out that passes constitutional muster. So this could actually get passed if there's the political will and hold up, because we've obviously had the Do Not Call registry. Now, what's happened just literally in the last week, and Heidi referred to it, that for a number of years, we've had federal privacy legislation stalled. There was Senator Wicker, Senator Cantwell, Senator Moran, Gillibrand, et cetera, have proposed at the Senate level, have proposed various privacy legislations. There's been others as well. But just last week, it was finally released, the American Data Privacy and Protection Act, the ADPPA. And the nice thing about this, it does incorporate the Delete Act into the ADPPA, where they're actually not called data brokers. And so, sorry, Jeff, you're going to have to learn a new expression. This proposed law, they're referred to as third-party collecting entities. And they have to, A, register, and B, they actually, as part of the registration process, that the FTC, actually separately from that, the FTC does provide this portal where consumers go, and the guys that the third-party collecting entities that have registered have to respect any consumer's request to globally delete and do not collect. The one last thing I'll say before I hand it over to Senator Becker, he can talk about what we were trying to accomplish here in California, is that the ADPPA actually preempts state law across the board. Now, there's a few little things like the Illinois biometrics law, it doesn't preempt, and there's one section of the CPRA which involves the personal data breach as it relates to their security questions and username and password. That's the only part. So what will happen is, and this is actually whether or not the ADPPA goes through, is going to kind of freeze out a lot of regulation that happens at the data broker level, at the state level, I should say, with data brokers, is because this will preempt it. So if this does pass, the California registry as well as the Vermont registry are no longer needed. You don't have to enhance it, et cetera. But obviously, and we should know in the next month or two whether or not it can squeak through. If it doesn't, I do urge other states and other people to still pursue this at the state level as well. So with that being said, I'm now going to hand it over to my state senator, who I'm proudly in his district, Senator Becker.
Well, good afternoon. I'd like to thank my fellow panelists and you all for initiating this important conversation and sharing this platform with us. A little bit more background about specifically the proposed legislation that we were working on this year, SB 1059. The bill, unfortunately, is not moving forward right now, but I think it's still worth discussing. And we got a very comprehensive view on what data brokers are and what they're doing with our data. And, some advertise that they collect over 10,000 data points, per consumer. And so, in 2018, the legislature passed a law requiring them to register, as we talked about. Not all are registering. And so what we tried to do is really set stricter annual registration and reporting requirements and doubling the penalties for data traffickers who do not comply with the law. And additionally, consumer advocacy organizations like Consumer Reports found that many data brokers are setting up roadblocks that impede California's ability to exercise their privacy rights. So we would require data brokers to have very clear instructions on how to exercise their privacy rights, to delete, as we talked about, correct, opt out, and how to identify who has purchased their personal data and limit the use of sensitive personal information. We also were requiring the data brokers to only disclose if they've been breached and if they collect, sell, or share information regarding children. So the intention was to make it very clear, very simple, to have a one-stop shop, rather than having to dig through hundreds of individual privacy disclosures and find opt-out links. In the same vein, this bill would have consolidated the registration and regulation of data brokers under the CPPA, the new state agency approved by voters through Prop 24. And we believe this would have simplified privacy oversight for consumers and for businesses. Lastly, what this would have done is to harmonize the data broker law with CPRA to include the concept of sharing. This was the same loophole closed by the CPRA. So the link at the bottom of the web page now says, "Do not sell or share my information." This became a big point of contention for my bill. The definition of sell does encompass a lot of sharing for valuable consideration. However, like Consumer Reports has found, data brokers claim they don't technically sell our personal information, but share it, and they do still make money, although they allege they do not receive valuable contribution consideration for it. So they will operate in the shadows and not register. So the important distinction here is the definition of share in the bill only covers sharing for cross-contextual behavioral advertising purposes. While we did have good support from folks initially through the Senate Judiciary Committee in advancing, we did hit a wall in the Appropriations Committee. So it's currently on this suspense file, which means it won't move forward this year. Now, with many issues like this, you do have to try numerous times and to continue to gain momentum and gain support. And thus, that's why we're still now in the process of saying, hey, great, what do we do? What is the plan for next year? But I'm certainly proud to author this bill and push forward this conversation. Again, California has led thus far, and we need to continue to lead. If the feds do act, as was mentioned, that would be terrific. In the meantime, it's our responsibility to continue to push forward. So data brokers are still sort of a shadowy, poorly understood issue, and I think certainly there was value in bringing this forward to my colleagues as well as to the public at large, and I will continue to do so. So that gives a little bit more of a sense of what we were aiming to do this year, and look forward to continuing the conversation today.
Thank you, Senator Becker. As Tom mentioned, I'm also from California, not exactly from District 13, but close by, and we really like what you are doing, and we would love to lead. California leads, and all other states, yes, please. We need things like this to be passed as a bill, as a regulation, as a law. So coming back to the federal level a bit, Heidi, I would love to turn the mic over to you. How do you see this progressing in the coming year, and what do you see as the main challenges to finding a suitable resolution?
Okay, it's going to move quickly. I can tell you that. Yeah, it's going to move quickly because of the legislation that just got dropped on Friday. They are having a meeting on Tuesday already. The Committee in Energy and Commerce is already having a meeting on Tuesday. The biggest challenge I see here is that this says draft, but they've been working on this for a long time. This is by no means a first draft. This is the compromise deal that was made between the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, the insurance lobby, all of the dark money interests that are supporting big tech, and the people who are pushing forward this legislation. This is the deal that was struck, and it was put out to see how it's going to move forward, and they're going to go forward with the hearings. Cantwell is not on board. She may even have her own hearing on the same day, just to drive home the point that she's not supporting this bill in its current format. Now, I want to go back in time a little bit to the 1970s. It was a good time, right? Yeah, the 70s. Yeah. So the FCRA, Fair Credit Reporting Act, was enacted in the 1970s to promote the accuracy, fairness, and privacy of consumer information contained in credit reporting agency files, because those were the places that people went to check for credit worthiness, to see if they wanted to rent you an apartment, to give you a loan for a car. All of these things were tied to a intermediary, a trusted intermediary to hold this information. So they had to follow certain rules. We were given the right to know what information you have, the right to have you correct the information if it is wrong, and the right to sue you if you don't. But there are only 3 credit reporting agencies, right? We know that's not true. They're just the 3 big credit reporting agencies that call themselves credit reporting agencies, and then also deal in every other shady business line that they can. But the reason why data brokers got this exception was in 2003, an amendment was made to the Fair Credit Reporting Act. Fact is, the amendment, 2003, it gave a reseller exception to the Fair Credit Reporting Act. In the Bush administration, in their infinite wisdom, the lobbyists came forward from the Chamber of Commerce and said, these people are not even talking to the consumer. They don't touch the consumer at all. There's no harm here. They're just collecting some information, right? And so they said, fine, you know what? We'll give you an exception. Yeah, because it sounds like it's good for business. Wrong. Because if somebody would have told you almost 20 years ago, back then, here's what your life is going to look like today. Teenagers are killing themselves because they're not getting the attention they need on social media. Other people are getting radicalized by white supremacists and shooting up people of color. I mean, if somebody said to you, this is what all of the targeting information is going to turn our world into, do you give consent since we're giving you this notice right now? You would have said no. You would have said no. But that's how they got into this business. And they've made nothing but money ever since in this line of business. So now that society has come around and said, hey, wait a minute, I think there's a problem. And over again, we're shocking the public conscious with new examples of how big this problem is. Now we have Roe about to be overturned. So I really honestly believe that all of the powers that be said, we have got to do something about data right now, because that is the only thing we have left to do to protect people. And it has gone from a privacy issue to a personal safety issue. Right now, my period can take me to a sentence. It is unbelievable. We don't even know what the decision says, but it's bad. So now we have suddenly a brand new bill. It's only been introduced in the House. It still needs to be introduced in the Senate. There are a couple of roadblocks to get it there. Like I said, Cantwell is not on board. The biggest holdup that she has with this is the private right of action. First of all, the fact that there is a private right of action is surprising to some people. But if you look at the details, there's a moratorium for 4 years before it kicks in. Why 4 years? Because the Chamber of Commerce and the insurance lobby said, surely we can get this handled. And we can overcome and weaken this law, if it is enacted, over 4 years' time. So that's something that we can do to claw back whatever policy we put in place. So they built themselves in time to undo it later. Now, the rights that we do have that are going to come with this legislation include the right of access, the right to correct, the right to delete, the right of portability within reasonable means, and that private right of action after 4 years. The duty on behalf of the businesses is couched in terms of a duty of loyalty. Now, this doesn't go as far as the GDPR, where the individual has the rights. The data subject owns the rights, and it's their rights. Over on our side, we more or less put obligations on businesses instead of give rights to individuals. So this bill looks like a compromise because we did get the rights of access, correction, deletion, portability, but we also have the duty of loyalty. However, in that duty of loyalty, there's no mention of self-dealing. As a lawyer, honestly, I would like to meet the other lawyer who was drafting language about a duty of loyalty and didn't include self-dealing. What's the matter with you? So that was a compromise that other people made on another area, I'm pretty sure. The data minimization, privacy by design, and price discrimination, that's great. That's fantastic. I don't see those as a duty of loyalty unless they include self-dealing, right? How are you going to be one of these large data holders who are working the advertising buttons and you already agreed to not highlight your own products, right? So you have another bill to say, I double dog dare you not to do it. I mean, it doesn't look like it's going to be that effective. The other area of contention, there are going to be big fights about this, is preemption. Now, the preemption, it wasn't a blanket preemption. They kind of did a dance. They have carve-outs. They're going to keep Illinois' BIPA. They're going to keep COPPA for children. They're going to keep the CPRA's private right of action only on data breaches. And they're going to keep the state UDAPs, right? So the state UDAPs are the ones that I've been advocating need to be used more often. So I like the fact that they left that in there because that does provide another avenue for a private right of action. So the law itself, it's set up in a way that it should try to appease everybody, and it tried to cover everything. Algorithmic bias, price discrimination, biometric data. It tries to cover a little bit of everything. The definitions do need some fine tuning. But one of the biggest problems that I have with this thing, it doesn't cover employee data. What is that about? That's bananas. So, I mean, that's a huge problem. They need to redo that on the next draft altogether. Why are they exempting employee data? Also, they are exempting de-identified data. I can tell you right now that most de-identified data is BS. Even if you do use a privacy-enhancing technology, such as differential privacy and k-anonymity, if you're using location data, it's almost impossible to ensure privacy. So even if you say it's been identified, depending on the privacy enhancing technology that you are using, you may or may not be achieving your goal. So saying that you're using it because you've got a fancy tool doesn't ensure that you are protecting someone's privacy, right? So that's a problem as well, just a blanket, de-identified data, because that is too squishy of an area for sure. And publicly available data, court records are garbage. They're just garbage. There's a lot of garbage in there. And so people are pulling data out of court records now. That's publicly available data that we know has got garbage in it. Just like the credit reporting agencies. They even say that almost 80% of their records have inaccuracies in them. So they're publishing garbage and they know it. So why are we going to provide an exemption for that? It doesn't behoove them to get better at increasing the accuracy of their data if you just give them exceptions. So the third-party collecting entities, they're data brokers. They're just data brokers. They are going to be chased down by the FTC, at least for this administration, and we'll see how long that goes. But there are a lot of different things in here that have built in a lot of time for them, such as the private right of action will have a committee to determine what the impact on society is of having that private right of action. And they've also got the request that's going to go in, the system that they need to build for the one request to delete all of your data for all the data brokers. That takes time to build. It takes accuracy. It takes, the voluntary commitment of those data brokers to be on that system. And it's going to take some lawsuits to get them to understand we're serious. You do have to do this. Just like the TCPA, where they said it's going to ruin business. But they didn't. They didn't ruin business. The TCPA is still going strong, and it's still holding back all the people that want to aggravate me on the phone all the time. So what it does is provide more obligations to businesses to check that registry before you go and light up another marketing email list, right? So those are kind of some of the things that we would like in place. This bill doesn't really go far enough, in my opinion, but I don't know that anyone ever will. The things I think you should watch for are dark money issue ads. Social media influencers are going to show up and start talking about some privacy and security, and they don't know what they're talking about. There are going to be fights on the private right of action, especially from the U.S. Chamber and the insurance lobby. And look out for legislators who have conflicted positions, because they rely on buying data from data brokers to run their campaigns as well. So that, that creates some sort of a conflict of interest there. But most legislators are starting to realize the return on the investment for the data they've been buying for the campaigns is in the 30% range, and it's really not worth it. So they're starting to move towards first-party consent and collecting their own data, so that they can, farm out their own information for their own campaigns, because authenticity and credibility is what wins elections, right? Not misinformation on Facebook, because we're trying to put an end to that now. So those are some of the things that I see with the new law that's coming out, some of the things I think that we should look out for, and some of the things that I'm kind of excited to see, just to cut down on the amount of toxic data that's out there being used by all of these systems. Disparate impact is real. Structural racism is real, and the harms are pervasive. So the sooner we give people agency to act and take control over their data, the sooner we can clean up our data systems and have better systems in place to cure some of the issues that we have in society.
Thanks, Heidi. I think that was a really good introduction. I really appreciate it. I might take a minute, if you'll allow me, to maybe just talk about two personal examples. And I really encourage, actually, any of the members on the call today, or anyone who's joined the call today, maybe to if they're comfortable, to pop in the chat or the questions, if they've their own examples themselves. But two quick examples I want to mention that just really frustrated me personally, kind of touching on this topic. The first was almost 3 years ago now. Enthusiastic and interested about privacy topics. I sent a freedom of information request to my state DMV, so I live in Virginia, asking them two questions. Had they sold my personal information to anybody? And if so, for how much? $16, by the way. I wish I could have just paid them directly. And how much money they had gained over the year selling people's information. I can't actually remember that figure for today's call, unfortunately, but it was in the many millions. But they did respond with that information, and they also named the data broker to whom they did sell my information. They didn't take me up on the offer of offering them $16 if they wouldn't do it in the future, unfortunately. But I contacted the data broker directly. Again, a name I had never heard of before and I've never heard of since. And I just politely asked, any chance he'd delete my data, thinking they would never respond. They actually responded, said absolutely no problem. Consequence was a little bit surprising. At the time, I had a company vehicle, and apparently my employer ran company DMV background checks through that third party on a rotating basis, and they came back with the conclusion of no records found. So I was approached by my employer saying, "Why have you no records found?" And I obviously had to explain the difference between no records found with this data broker as opposed to no records found with the DMV, where the data is actually available. But anyway, just an interesting one. And also, by them simply having deleted the data they'd collected at that point doesn't mean they haven't repurchased it from the Virginia DMV in the meantime, let's say. My second example is also auto-related, but that's a coincidence, and it's much more recent. It's actually in the last weeks. Ultimately, shopping around trying to buy some auto insurance online, got some quotes, made my decision. One of the large insurance companies also sent me a letter to say that the quote they had given me was higher than it would otherwise been as a result of information they had got from one of the credit rating agencies. And they listed various entirely inaccurate information about me that apparently had been provided by that credit rating agency, and told me, I should contact them and I have 30 days to get it sorted, etc. Of course, I'd already made a decision to purchase insurance elsewhere, but eager also to have this corrected in case it turns into an issue for the future. However, being sent around in circles and the incomprehensible request mechanisms of these companies, the credit rating agency claims that they never sent any information to that insurance company at all, and that information doesn't appear in my credit rating. So I'm ultimately stuck between an insurance company that believes they purchased information about me, which they have given me a list of data that's clearly inaccurate. They claim they purchased it from a named credit rating agency, and that agency said they never gave any information at all, and that information never appeared on my file. So, yeah, obviously this is kind of a simplistic, less scary than some of the examples we talked about before, but incredibly frustrating that, I'm going around in circles trying to fix this. Tom, Senator Becker, Heidi, Jeff, jump in. Like, what other examples are we seeing of how this is impacting people, kind of practical frustrations, like the examples that just came my way?
Well, look, we're in a scoring society, and what's happening, and I'm very grateful that the ADPPA has added the algorithmic capabilities that were in a separate piece of legislation as well. And I know at the California level that, auditing, like having the equivalent of an FDA audit of algorithms was called up. But the reality is that we've become a scoring society. Historically, scoring was based on your credit, right? But now there's, and Josh can appreciate this because he comes from a tech company as well, that, there's like products like HireVue, right? That will actually, if you do an interview, that they will look at your face and the way you talk and all that stuff and grade you, right? And then they will actually incorporate the third-party information and give you a hiring score, okay? And so your employment is now based on factors such as, the tilt of your head or the way that you talk, et cetera. And there's a number of companies that are doing that as well. We're obviously scored as consumers, as potential customers, that our wait time for tech support calls sometimes is actually based on our score. If we have a lower score, they have no problem saying you got to wait an hour. But if your score much higher, you can jump to the head of the queue, right? There's also rent, right? Rent, whether or not the scoring will be tell potential renters if this person is likely to default on a rent payment as well. So we've become a scoring society, fed data from data brokers, and then with the algorithmic interpretation of that data, creating predictions, creating scoring, has led to some significant concerns about digital redlining, okay? And so that is of a great deal of concern. And I'm going to flip this over to Senator Becker, but there's also a great deal of concern in California regarding abortion rights, right? And so I think, and I know Senator Becker and myself, we were very concerned about the reports that there were certain companies selling personal information about people coming and going from Planned Parenthoods. And to Heidi's point, that this information is easily de-identified. I actually, like Joe, I contacted some data brokers, and they had my MAIDs, my mobile advertising IDs. And once you have the MAID, then you can actually correlate that with other data and then eventually figure out it's me. Or at the very least, if you're tracking my location, that you see that I'm always coming back to my home here in Northern California. So it's very easy to eventually deduce. But maybe Senator Becker, maybe talk about some of your concerns as it relates to, and what's going on in California as it relates to, protecting women and the right to choose.
Yeah, you're right, Tom. There were very concerning reports, and the thought that people seeking abortion and other reproductive health care could be, in some cases already have been, data tracked and had that highly personal private information scraped in by brokers and sold. We have to be cognizant that we're trying to protect people who are going to be coming from other states like Texas here to California for continued safe access to abortion services, that they aren't tracked and then risk police or private citizens wherever in their home state, which they've been kind of weaponized as individuals, with anti-abortion police trying to get broker data to prosecute them for seeking health care. So it's a big concern of mine and my team, and we're looking at ways to try and address that issue. So that's just one very pressing and timely example of where we can get to with this. And when Tom first contacted me, there were other examples of, I think it was around Muslim prayer attendees that was being sold in other cases. And you can imagine that could be sold in military ways and be not helpful. And there, other examples, but those are a couple of really pressing. The abortion rights one is a very pressing one.
Yeah. Tom talked a little bit about scoring. This isn't directly related to data brokers, but I just read a story today about a guy who was misidentified, apparently from facial recognition, and it was a sort of a series of missteps. But a white male in New Mexico who ended up in jail for 2 weeks because he was apparently they thought he was shoplifting, and he was misidentified and thrown in jail and never got adequate counsel. And now his life is sort of a bit of a wreck because of misidentification from an algorithm. But I think the bigger issue here is, if you look at this, right, these new privacy laws, whether it's CCPA or GDPR or even the new American Data Privacy and Protection Act, are giving us the right to request information, to delete information, to request that companies not sell our information. But with data brokers and other, depending on how broadly you describe that term, we can't effectuate those rights because they're hiding either in the shadows or behind definitional changes. So, and then even if we can actually get to that, they're making these opt-out processes so complicated, it's virtually impossible for an individual to actually exercise those rights. And that's a huge problem.
I'm glad you brought that up on the law enforcement here. That's one of my biggest issues with the exceptions here is the Cop loophole. Because currently it's awful. Even big tech will tell you it's awful because the law enforcement will come and say, this area on the map, every phone that was in it at this time. I mean, really? That's super broad. That's like, that is beyond a breach of civil rights. That is just morally repugnant that they have the ability to walk in and say, I'm fishing for anyone searching anything under these search terms. And these are the methodologies that they're using today. And FISA 702 is also giving a little bit of credibility to the law enforcement need to go and do this. But that guy in Arizona, he or in New Mexico or whatever, he was allegedly shoplifting at the airport a couple of weeks previously. And
Right.
They put a lot of time and effort and work into going after this shoplifter, Well, how much time and effort and work are they putting into going after people that are buying 17 guns at a time? None at all, right? So we're fighting for people to stop collecting data on us right now. But Congress is also tied up in fighting over what data they don't want to collect on people for background checks. So where do we stand on information, right? Do we need to surveil people or do we not? Do we have trusted intermediaries or don't we? Because the current way that we have it set up isn't working, and this is offering another exception for law enforcement. I want them to be able to do their job, but I also want them to do it in a privacy respecting way. Warrants are there for a reason, right? And I think that, the existing system that we had was working. I don't know why they just threw that out the window and said, I'm just going to draw a map and data company, you have to give me everything that I asked for inside the dimensions of this map that I drew. It says so in the operating agreement in terms of use of every app. All of these apps and services that you use says, I may have to give your information over to law enforcement for any or no reason, pretty much. And this is why. So exactly. So until we can curb that behavior and find where the line is on where our rights are, I don't think we're going to be able to move any further on this to try to protect people, because the people who are buying these lists of women who are going to Planned Parenthood, what are they going to do with that list? Are those that, Are those the crazy religious people that are going to, show up outside the Supreme Court justice's house with a gun? That's kind of a problem. So, I mean, where are we on ethics and public, knowledge and, at some point, fairness does need to be discussed, but what does fairness mean anymore? So, and who gets to decide what fairness is when it comes to these big issues that affect us all.
I would like to bring up, actually, you just drafting on what Heidi said, there's actually a couple additional pieces of legislation that involves data brokers at the federal level that I want to bring up that are not really incorporated in this recent federal proposal. And you know, maybe these are things that maybe at the California level that could also you know, be thought of. And so there's actually 3 bills. The first of which is, and probably you can't implement this at the state level, but it's the Fourth Amendment is not for sale. And so what's happening is that law enforcement like ICE, for example, because of sanctuary laws, which we have here in California, they can't get the information about specific individuals, but they are able to buy comparable information through data brokers. And so under normal circumstances, they would have to get a warrant, right, to get this information either from a state government or another entity, right? But now they're actually working their way around. And so we've had a lot of instances in which different governmental agencies have been able to subvert the warrant process by getting the data from data brokers. And frankly, you know, why do you have to, I don't know, you know, get a court-approved, you know, warrant to track someone when you can just and tail them around or see what they're doing on their computer and seize their computer when you can buy their search history, their location, et cetera. So that's one piece of legislation. The second piece of legislation that was also recently introduced, and this is more of a federal, is the Protecting Military Service Members Data Act of 2022. Data brokers have no limitations on who they can sell their data to. And so what this bill would actually limit the sale of information to foreign governments, right? And specifically calling out, especially, but this is narrowly focused on military personnel. And it's narrowly focused on China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea as well. So that's, but, you know, if data brokers, you know, they'll sell it to anyone, right? And so this would actually put a limitation. And then the third one, and California actually does have some legislation in this area, involves doxing, in which, you know, like if you're upset at a law enforcement officer, that you could go to a data broker people search site, get information and publish it and put their home address, their phone numbers, pictures of their kids, et cetera. But what's happening here across the nation and is that, you know, there's a great deal of people getting upset beyond cops. They're getting upset at health officials. They're getting mad at school board people. And so we do have a serious issue with doxing that involves public officials, and it's expanded. Now, there is a federal bill to protect judges, right? Federal judges, and that's named after a young man that was unfortunately killed when a person got information about a federal judge, showed up at the front doorstep and shot the young man. It's the Daniel Andrel Judiciary Security and Privacy Act. But I think that there's also potentially, even here in California, there's the opportunity to provide better protection of school administrators and health administrators as well, because we know that there was a lot of passion, you know, about COVID mask mandates. There's a lot of passion about the teaching of specific topics, et cetera. And what's evolved, unfortunately, is that people are going to weaponize the information from data brokers because it's readily available and put people in uncomfortable and distressful situations by doxing them as well. So those are 3 more examples of legislation at the federal level that involve data brokers as well. And, you know, some of them, like the Fourth Amendment is not for sale, is not that's involved in the Fourth Amendment. That's not something that any state can do. But clearly there could be some more rules and laws about protection of public officials at the state level, for example. And then, you know, potentially further limiting, you know, what a data broker and who a data broker can sell to as well.
Yeah.
I actually want to jump in here, talking about personal experiences. Has any of you tried to look up a people search recently. Oh my goodness. I tried to do a people search on myself, and I was shocked at the information they gave me for free. And just for mere $5, mind you, just $5, I could get history for like 15 years, all the past addresses, street addresses, home addresses, my job titles. Like, it was scary how much money is remaining on my on the house, like the mortgage amount, which is like a private information that only the banks have, and that should not be a public information. Somehow these data brokers are getting all of this information to the point that it was really scary, and it was like annoying. Like, how come this information is for sale?
Yeah. I mean,
and available for $5, mind
yeah,
you.
the ecosystem is data brokers buy from other data brokers. And so bad data and zombie data gets replicated throughout the system as well. And that involves, I mean, unfortunately, and I know Jeff talked about it, and I know the senator's bill involved this, is that, you know, getting that right definition of what a data broker is, because until you actually get a better definition of what a data broker is, then you can better regulate them as well. I'm actually, the definition in the ADPPA is pretty good, right? It says, hey, if you're doing a commercial relationship, in effect, right there, as opposed to this whole concept of selling. Because what we try to do in California to enhance the data broker registry was, it turns out that there's a lot of companies that, I technically don't sell the information. They don't actually give you like a CD or go to this FTP site and you download the data. They're like, well, we'll share it. We'll give you access, or we'll share it, or you could go into our ad network and then advertise to people as well. Of course, they're trying to monetize that as well. But yeah, it is very scary to know what the information I've seen instances of people search sites that know that my in-laws that are related to me in Minnesota that don't have my last name. It's just like, it's freaky, the amount of information that these folks gather on you.
And how come they have all this information that should be private? Like, banks should not be giving out this information, right?
Well, there are public records that they scrape the public records, and some of that information that the banks do provide. But they also scrape your transactions. And so like Nielsen has complete access. I mean, it's in the tens of millions per day. They capture every purchase. Take it, your Safeway card or your gas card, the loyalty programs, you get discounts and you sell your information, and they know exactly that you bought Tide, or you bought Pop-Tarts versus, this flavor of cereal, et cetera. So it's the, and of course, that you factor big data, ML, AI, to it, is the ability to,
mine it.
Mine it. There's like, Axiom advertises they have at least 11,000 bits of information about each and every person times 2.5 billion.
So I talked to the chief ethics officer at Axiom. They got one, right? I got to meet that guy. And I said, so how's that going with the CCPA? Because it was new at the time. And he said, gosh, we were just thinking the sky's going to fall. And we got about 500 requests over a year total. That was it. And so we figured it was much ado about nothing. And so they didn't even care. But exactly. And they have everyone on the planet, and they only got 500 people. So thank you for giving me a right, but it's really arduous to exercise that right. So
that is why, see, the problem is that the consumer has to, like, they go to the Vermont site, they go to the California site, and between the two of them, there's 500, right? So not all of them are registering, but you have to go to each and every data broker, and they give you the runaround, from there, right? Mm-hmm. And that's the power of going to a single portal and doing a global delete. And so you just go to one place and then boom. And that would be great. If it doesn't happen at the federal level, that would be a great thing potentially to do at Vermont, or I know the AG in Vermont was thinking that. I know Josh and I have talked about that as well.
I think if it did happen at state level, you might have a lot of folks trying to bluff their address to be in that state if they're outside. But unfortunately, the data brokers would probably know better, and you might not get away with that. But
so I want to take an audience question. We thank you, audience. We're having some great engagement here. I want to take this question from Torian Dyer. How do we plan to close the loopholes in data privacy laws? As someone who understands the data science and loopholes to current data privacy legislation, such as the inability of people to actually verify that their data was deleted, the idea of shadow profiles, the difficulty for people whose data is collected anonymously to ensure that that was removed, even though the data broker was able to add another anonymous source to the original data and de-anonymize you. So long question, but how do we plan to close this loophole?
I'll defer to Tom on most of the details. I apologize, I do have to run to another event. I really enjoyed the discussion. I appreciate it. And I look forward to continuing it because we're still in the early innings of this ball game. And I appreciate the leadership of everyone on this call. I will say, as discussed, certainly with our bill, we were trying to make it easier to do that delete process. That was one of the key pieces of the bill for the exact reasons that Tom just mentioned. It's so difficult, and we know at the end of the day, people aren't going to do it if it's that difficult to do. But in terms of covering some of the other pieces, I will defer to some of the experts here and say I look forward to continuing to work with all of you.
Senator Becker, you need to come this way to Washington soon. It's heating up over here. We could use your support in talking to folks to get this done. So I don't know what your summer plans include, but you should be okay. Thank you so much.
Happy to do it.
Thank you. Senator Becker, thank you so much for your time.
So maybe just to make half a comment on the question that we had. I mean, I think one of the biggest challenges right now is even if you do convince them to delete, that doesn't mean they can't recollect it in 10 minutes.
It's technologically hard to delete, right? Yeah, it's super hard to actually factually delete it so it's gone. Because do you mean delete like it was never here, or delete where it's not accessed again?
Yeah, but I wrote a blog on this that you could actually kind of insert some dummy data, and then you can test and validate to see if that data has been deleted or not. And then there is an audit in both the Delete Act and to a lesser, actually the Delete Act has much more auditing capabilities than the ADPPA. But there are ways that you could actually audit this. And then with it being under the FTC, they do have the full rights if data brokers are messing around that unfair trade practices can come up, and so there could be some action taken against certain entities if they don't follow through on this. But obviously, we're all talking about something that hasn't passed yet, et cetera. I mean, the reality is that Senator Becker and I ran into a buzzsaw just trying to improve the data broker registry law, right? So there's going to be a lot of pushback on this. And it's complicated. I'll give it that who is really a data broker? Is Google a data broker? Then they probably wouldn't want to have to register for one of these global deletes, because then all of a sudden someone can go in there and boom, all their Google data gets deleted right there. So you got to get the definitions of a direct relationship versus indirect, what kind of transactions that you do, et cetera. So it's complicated, but if we can get to the point where we make it simple for consumers to have one-stop shopping, a portal where like the do not call registry, it should significantly make things a lot better for consumers. So we don't have that same thing in terms of the people site that Shilpi talked about, and the issue that Joe had, and everyone else on this Zoom is.
So the question, I want to address a question about the loopholes in privacy. So foundationally, we need rights in the data first. If we have rights in the data, then we can start to use that agency to do something about the toxic data that's out there, to clean it out of the systems so it won't be used against us. But first, we need to know who has the data. Who are these data brokers? Then we need to know, what do you have about me? And then we can go about correcting it. But all of this takes affirmative action and work on my part. Even if it's one-stop shopping, it's still work on my part to go and clean up whatever data is out there. And then, and only then, will I be able to move forward and say, I can trust these systems now for housing, lending, education, competition, all of these systems that use AI. You can't trust them if you're using biased data. Data is biased in the training set. Then you've got bias in the algorithm itself. And then you've got bias in the outputs. So, you know, humans in the loop are going to be a significant part of closing the privacy loophole. But first, we need rights, foundational rights in the data. Then we need humans in the loop. And then we need ethics applied to the situation. Then we'll have something that looks more like fairness that we were talking about earlier. I think those things need to happen before we can start to close those loopholes on privacy. I don't know if that answers the question or not, but I thought I'd give it a shot.
Yeah. Thanks, Heidi, for that. But so CCPA is legal in California, like it's a law, right? But even so, I don't know how much Tom has an experience with that. Like if you actually go to a website, and because we are from California, this is our right, we can tell them to show the data that they have on us. And even we can even ask them to delete the data that they have on us, right? But whether they are doing that, whether that was followed through or not, there is no coming back to that. Yes, they can inform us saying that, yes, it was deleted, or, you know, this is what we have on you. But who is enforcing and making sure that, number one, that data was actually deleted? And because data, if you look at in an organization, it is so fragmented, and so many different divisions have so much different pieces of information on you, that if you request one division to delete something, it doesn't mean it has been deleted from the entire organization. They need to have central data management systems, which they are now getting to, but it's not there yet. Second, even if you said once to delete it, number one, whether they actually did it or not is a question. Two, what stops them from then collecting data on you and then building a second profile on that? So is requesting once saying that, okay, I don't want it, and they will put like you in a black box and not do it ever again?
Yeah. So the CPR regulations, so first of all, let's step back. Only 2 states have a registry, Vermont and California.
Yes.
Only 5 states have a state privacy law that gives you the right. So if you live in 45 of the 50 states and then the additional territories, you don't actually have the right to tell a data broker to delete or do not sell, etc. Okay. So that's the first thing. Now, most will respect that, assuming that you can go through the bureaucracy. But the CPR regulations in California, the draft of them was just produced. I just wrote a blog on this, and they explicitly say in the regulations that if you get a request to delete and then subsequent data comes in that you purchase from, say, a data broker, you need to have the record of the prior deletions and make sure that you scrub any new data in there. I'm not saying it guarantees that, but that was a specific, you identified kind of a loophole, because again, the data from data brokers is highly inaccurate. NATO did a study and found 40 to 50% of the data was bad. And Jeff gave some other statistics as well. I mean, there's lots of articles of individual reporters finding that as well. So that's the first issue. The second issue is that most data from data brokers come from other data brokers. So it kind of just like replicates itself all around as well. So you have to, this is like the third iteration of the CCPA regulations that are now in the CPRA. And I wrote a blog, my latest blog post actually calls this out because the folks in the Privacy Protection Agency noticed this, and they actually had to explicitly give a definition to stop this from occurring. So it really requires now we're fortunate in California that we now have a regulatory agency that can actually write the rules and do enforcement. We don't even have that at the national level, let alone a federal privacy law, et cetera. And so those are the type of things that are needed and required
at the federal level.
Yeah. So there's been there's 4 specific things added to the CPR regs involving data brokers, and that's one of them.
Yeah. Hey, I want to throw something out here. So I think, short of a legislative portal like the Delete Act would create, or like ADPPA may create, there is one alternative that might help you delete information more effectively from data brokers and keep it from popping back up. And I say might because you have to be careful here. There are organizations that I sort of refer to as privacy agents that help consumers try to delete their data profile by automating some of these, what we call DSAR requests, data subject access requests, specifically sort of do not sell requests and delete requests. You have to be sort of careful because some of them are less savory than others, I think. But there are some new ones that are coming out and some other ones that are getting better. And I think some of them are worth it, because one of the things that they will do is potentially automate those requests. So once they've sent it to an organization, they can send it back again, the next year, and make sure that you haven't popped back in, which I think is a really good idea. Now, generally, these things aren't free, so you need to be careful, obviously, that you're not wasting your money or spending money frivolously. But some of them are pretty good. So I'm actually going to do a post and do some evaluations on that soon. So look for that.
Cool. Can we get a Groupon? Privacy is still for the wealthy. Need some Groupons.
It's a good idea.
Okay. So I wanted to talk about algorithmic bias just real quick. I'm working with For Humanity, and we are currently in a working group drafting the audit criteria for how to conduct a bias audit in your AI systems, and specifically employment tools. And there are just so many different areas for where these things can go wrong. Tom, you brought up HireVue. And when it comes to HireVue, we know that they are not working on people with disabilities. They can't even accommodate people that are neurodiverse. It says so on their site. It says, if you are neurodiverse, please tell someone that you trust and have them call our office to ask for an accommodation. But also, by doing so, you'll be telling us you're neurodiverse. So why do they have to give out that information? Because these tools were never designed to be used for everyone. So all of the tools that they're using now for hiring, you give them a resume. It says, do you want me to parse your resume, or do you want to be punished and have to manually input all the information? So you say, yeah, parse it. So what it does is takes your information and puts it into a data structure. The data structure is then reviewed by the algorithm for pattern matching. And if it doesn't match the pattern, you're thrown into the trash. You were never seen by a human. Now, what are they matching patterns for? What information did they have in there in that data structure? Because they took whatever profile they had from readily available data from all of these HR data broker sites and mashed it all together in this toxic brew of a profile that says, this is you, even if it says you're a werewolf, but they say, this is you. And they look for patterns and see if you match and you move forward in the job process or not. And in the great recession that we're in right now, people are not moving forward. And people have left their jobs because they weren't happy with the job that they got. In the last 7 years that they've started using all of these tools, the employment situation has gotten abysmal. People are getting sold jobs that they hate and they leave, and employers can't find people to come and work at the job because they're screening out qualified applicants. Why? Because everybody's relying on data and nobody's relying on humans. So if the human in HR talks to the human with a resume, they may have a better match, but that's just not how the systems are working at this point. So I filed a case with the EEOC, and at their request, an additional case with the FTC, because it involves algorithmic bias, and they're going to need help with it. So they just filed charges last week on this. So this case is going to be moving forward. It is sexual discrimination. It's Title VII. It's just about every cause of action that they could throw at this thing. And it's all based on algorithmic bias. What information are you looking at when you're evaluating a candidate? Because they get a bucket of information and they're only entitled to a copy. So this new legislation may curb that behavior as well as put audit criteria and regulations on people using AI, because everybody calls everything AI and nobody knows how it works. But to at least have explainable AI so that they can be audited for trustworthiness and people will know how these factors and metrics are used for or against you. So I think that is something that I wasn't expecting out of a privacy bill, for it to encompass algorithmic bias. because that is a lot of our problems right there. So I'm kind of excited about it. And I wanted to know, what do you guys think about it? Because the more I've worked with algorithmic bias and to find out how tricky it is to get the robot to do exactly what you need it to do, I can't imagine how many things we're going to find once, laws like these go widespread and we have to evaluate everyone's system. What do you guys think about that? We don't have enough auditors right now, I'll tell you that.
So coming back to what Tom was mentioning, right, that company that looks at, the tilt of your head. So they are basically looking at non-verbal clues for hiring, right? And so that puts people with English as a second language and not fluent in a particular language flagged off as maybe not competent for a particular job. There are many other non-verbal cues that these sort of AI systems are picking up and then aggregating that with other information, again, available elsewhere, and then used for the hiring decision. So I think, putting the picture of the person next with the name itself, the last name of the person says a lot, right? You can tell a lot by the last name of a person. Putting a picture next to that application says a lot. It's a dead giveaway. Even though we don't want to be biased, it certainly leads you, it can be used as a bias, So like Tom was saying, it's a very tricky. It's not easy. It's not black and white. It's a very tricky situation to say what is legal, what is illegal, what is really intentional bias versus unintentional bias, and what can we remove from that application process to be more fair.
Oh, it's illegal. I'll tell you that right now. Oh, it's flat illegal. I'll tell you that. I got people working on it. I will prove that it's illegal. But until someone jumps in the fire to say, here's what's happening, here's how it's illegal, and here's what best practices need to be moving forward, change is made in such ways. But until you get this sort of transformative change and case available, you don't have anyone in the common market saying, I'm going to make changes because it's the right thing to do. That's not what they do.
Yeah. So I sort of look at this from both perspectives, right? I mean, look at it from data science perspective and an ethics perspective. I was looking at something for a client, sort of analyzing job titles. And just that little snippet of something like, okay, I'm a senior vice president of X, right? Or I'm a lead data programmer, right? Just a few words like that, you can actually intuit, what industry somebody's in often. You can figure out what level of an organization they're in. You can figure out what skills they might have, right? An amazing amount of information just from a job title. And if you've got a couple of job titles, even more. And so if I got, 3 job titles from Heidi, I could probably figure out exactly what she does and a hell of a lot of information about her. And that's pretty scary, right? If you think about it from now, I'm going to try to intuit things about her and figure out where she might need to go or what I think about her. And right, that information might be biased in certain ways based upon historical titles or, how I interpret them. So there's all kinds of problems here.
I think Tom wants to add something.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to, Jeff, sorry. I think when you talk about data brokers, it does bleed into talking about AI, because AI, specifically machine learning, needs data. That's the fuel, right? To train itself, okay? And we've talked about how bad the data is from data brokers. It's bad in terms of it being incorrect, but it's also bad in terms of it being highly sensitive, that corporations and people purchasing that data actually know more about you than you know about yourself, because they can infer specific things about you. Or you may be, have a disease, or you may be coming out, or whatever, and your friends, your family may not know that, but any advertiser knows that you have cancer or whatever. And then, so you got all this bad data, and then it hits AI. And AI historically, from a decision-making perspective, a lot of it had to do with scoring. And as we talked about, there's actually two there's AI bias caused by the data. And so you could have bad data coming in. You could have biased data based on historical information that Jeff talked about, where if you, like what Amazon had, this resume screening system that they built. Well, you know, it's a predominantly male industry, and all their hires, 60% of Amazon at the time were male. So of course they're going to like recommend resumes of white males, right? Because that's what they had historically done as well. Okay. And then you have undersampling, oversampling, all that stuff. But then you also have design. And I want to go back to what was said earlier, which is that, yes, you cannot put in, you know, race into the design. You can't say, you know, what race or religion or whatever, but there's proxy attributes that you can extract from data brokers, right? That can, the simplest one is zip code. There may be predominantly African-American communities or Hispanic communities, et cetera. But what if you are able to buy applications? And then as Senator Becker said, that, you know, that you could figure out, you can buy what type of applications, like if you have a Muslim prayer app. So that allows you to do that. So even though you're not saying, hey, I'm not doing it on religion, but I'm saying, well, let me see what kind of apps there is as well. So it's data brokers provide a lot of the jet fuel to AI that can have both design bias, specifically around proxy discrimination, or bias in the data itself. And so those, you can't talk about one but not talking about the other, which is what we've led to in this conversation.
Yeah.
So we only have a few minutes left. I want to take any audience questions. Are there any burning audience questions? Let's see.
Is there anyone in the audience? We can't see anybody.
You can see, but the comments, if you look at the comment section, all the comments are coming in and we can see them. So again, Torian, I'm going to take this question. What are the feelings of the policing part of government as a data broker, or finding loopholes around the Fourth Amendment? Any thoughts on limiting the data retention? So that's the last question we'll take, and we'll wrap it up with some final words on how you can continue on this discussion, join the movement with DataEthics4All. So I'm going to talk a little bit more on that.
Yeah, I think the Fourth Amendment not for sale specifically is the piece of legislation. You can't do that at the federal level because it is it's the you know, the part of the Bill of Rights, right? And it's working around getting a warrant, getting a subpoena, et cetera, by leveraging data. And so I think that is, and that's not part of the ADPPA, for example. That's separately, you know, not addressed. Obviously, there was like the AI Accountability Act was also not fully put into the AADP. So there are pieces of legislation out there, such as the Fourth Amendment not for sale, the AI Accountability Act, just go down the list, that will still need to be tackled even if we get this federal privacy law.
Yeah. There is an Oakland organization, I forget what it's called, the Oakland Privacy Commission or something like that, that does really good community work and doing things like decreasing retention times for personal data in their community. So if people are trying to look at like local law enforcement retention times for private data, personal data, that's a good way to go as well. So I do think that there are different ways that we can reduce that law enforcement footprint, and it's not just on the federal level.
I think making sure that law enforcement is a good thing to do, first of all. Yeah, because they had people parading as law enforcement. They were getting access to information too. So, I mean, that's just how squishy the requirements are. So that could go a long way to tighten that up. Yeah.
And obviously, back to the quality of the data too. Even if things are done in a way we'd all feel is suitable, if they're ultimately getting access to data that's not accurate, that's neither helpful for genuine law enforcement efforts nor for anybody involved in the process. Maybe a final point from my side. Obviously, you know, we've seen enforcement with a core period by the Office of Attorney General in California in the past. And for people who might be interested, they actually give examples on their website of various areas that they've, you know, taken enforcement action. Now, in most scenarios, again, if you correct your issue within 30 days, that's the end of the penalty. But it is interesting to read through some of the extreme examples of non-compliance where, for example, folks tried to ask for their data to be deleted and were asked to pay a certain fee for that service, and various other weird and wonderful things. So we do have a long way to go, and I think the theoretical argument there and then the reality can be an issue. My final point would be, this new federal law, the draft of which we've seen last week, my understanding is it doesn't include any money, any dollars for enforcement for the FTC. So obviously, in terms of kind of the enforcement side would be a huge topic, especially if we've seen examples where even, for example, in California, where there was a law in place, but, if there's nobody there to back it up and enforce it behind the scenes, especially if, as that, I understand both sides of the argument on the private right action debate, but wherever that lands, regardless, obviously somebody has to enforce a law, or a law is nothing.
Yeah. One last closing point for me. I wish that there was data retention mandated and data destruction mandated in this bill, so that when the data comes in, they could tag it with a retention period. And we need better investment in data destruction technologies, because there just aren't enough out there to make sure that it was deleted. You can verify that it was deleted. We need better data destruction technologies, and it needs to be verifiable, and they need to be mandated for their use. So I think that would button up the very last ends of all the stuff that I want in my big wish of privacy list, right? So, but thanks for this program. I appreciate you putting this together. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, everyone. Tom, more investment ideas for you. I need to invest in these kind of programs.
Yeah, my plan won't make money, though.
All right, awesome. Thank you, everyone. And for the panelists, it was a wonderful, wonderful, informative session. And I hope that we can continue this. This is a start of a conversation of a lifetime that we need to have, and we need to have more of such conversations. I encourage all of you to share your personal stories. We heard a few today, but the more personal stories we know of how data breach has affected you, we can continue the conversation on the Data Ethics for All community, which is a global platform of 1,100 leaders from 55 countries at the intersection of data ethics, technology, policy, and social impact. In 2020, we did a hackathon on one of these very important issues, which was AI for criminal justice, new ideas to, criminal justice, predictive policing, and COVID-19 contact tracing, all of which involved using of data and then misusing the historical data is then used to create new systems. And then the new systems have those biases that come with the historical data. And so we have to break this cycle. Data Ethics for All is one organization that is working towards creating a better data and AI world. And I invite all of you to join. Check out dataethics4all.org for more information. Thank you again. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.